Yo, this is Beer in the Conversation, the world's #1 show for a comprehensive barbershop talk. This is your boy Rashid Muhammad here with the wellness architect Kevin Thornton. How you doing, black man?
I'm great, brother. How are you?
Oh man, it's a good day. I got to share a little bit of something with you.
I'm ready for it.
It's been a little bit of a tough week because I don't want to take up a lot of airtime with this thing, but 11 years ago, my dad had a aortic dissection. Mm-hmm. Like his aorta was like literally coming apart. Right. Years of high blood pressure and that sort of thing. And he was driving home, and he just wanted to take a nap. And he called my stepmother. My stepmother was like, "No, you need to go to the emergency room." He went to the emergency room, and then they took a scan. They were like, "You're getting on the helicopter," and they like air flew him to get like open heart surgery.
Okay.
And so they put a piece of carbon fiber on his aorta to deal with the dissection, and it worked. And but at the time they were like, "This is going to be this thing's going to work for about 10 years." Mm-hmm. I was like, "It's a shelf life. It's about 10 years." And so, last year, he every year since then he's been like getting all these scans and whatnot. But like last year, these scans started to like, start showing some things that were very much in line with what you would expect. It's been 10. They said it was going to be 10 years. It's been 10 years. In order to fix it, he was going to have to take, he's going to have to undergo like big time heart surgery.
Right.
Which they didn't do at the time because again, it was like an emergency surgery, and like he wasn't able to get prepared and all that sort of stuff. But and it's a very different thing to like, feel bad and then go to the hospital and say, "Hey, we've got to operate." It's a whole other thing when like you've been living your life normally and then they're like, "Hey, we've got to operate."
Right.
And it's like a big operation. And he had a mentality early on that like, I don't know that I want to deal with this. I don't want to go through this again. Because again, he got cut open like, they like cut your rib cage open, and like it's like you got hit by a truck, and like you got to go through rehab and that sort of thing. And early on he was like, he didn't know he wanted to go through it, but over the last year he's kind of come around, and the last scan just made it clear that like something's going to have to happen.
Right.
And it wasn't like an immediate thing. He probably could have gone like 6 months to a year without doing it, but Pops was like, "You know what, God's got my back." Right. And if it's time to go, it's just time to go. But let's try to get this thing taken care of. And like, so the idea was that the surgery was gonna like take care of it. It's gonna be a thing where like there's no more like shelf life on it. That like it's gonna only take care of it. And so he decided to go through with it. And so this week he's been in the hospital all week. Monday he had a procedure to like move an artery. They could have done that while they were doing the bigger procedure, but they decided to like give his body time to heal or whatever. Right. So he did that on Monday. That went well. And so today he went under the knife for like the big surgery. And we got, the surgeons told us that like it could not have gone better. Good. And so he's in ICU now, but he's stabilizing, and God willing, he'll come all the way through it. But it's been a rough week because we talk a lot about like the black family. Yep. You know what I'm saying? And in particular like the black man's role in the black family. Yep. And my pops, man, I grew up, I had like a weird situation where like, my parents were never married, and I didn't meet my mother till I was like in the 6th or 7th grade. I was raised until I was 13 by my grandmother, but my dad was always there. Mm-hmm. Like whenever I was, misbehaving, like he was the enforcer. Right. You know what I'm saying? And so he was the one that kept me in line. My grandmother died when I was 13, and I moved in with him, and like neither one of us like had expected that was happening when it happened. And but I'd gotten to the point where my grandmother couldn't really do a whole lot with me, and so like I needed him. I needed to like get to the point where like I was living with a man who was like keeping my ass in check, Mm-hmm. And so so he's been obviously the most influential person in my life, and the probability of him coming out of this surgery was not certain. Right. And it gets you just thinking about a few things. So anyway, I'm sorry, I've taken up way too much time already.
I want to kind of like piggyback on that.
Sure.
First of all, I'm glad your father's doing well. First of all,
thank you.
But second of all, we watched that part of that documentary last week.
Yes.
And especially since you come from where you grew up with your dad, for the most part, you watched all your life.
Yeah.
I grew up in a two-family household. I think we see things a little bit differently, and I want to get your take on the thought pattern of the people today feeling like they can just have a child, and it doesn't really matter if the father's there, because as long as they there, it's gonna be okay.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a complicated thing. I mean, I do think that, you look at the statistics for the black community, and you see that 70% of black children are born out of wedlock. And for me, out of wedlock, that's not actually what I think is the most important thing, right?
Right.
Because whether your parents are married, I mean, look, obviously, ideally, yes, out of wedlock matters, but there are plenty of fathers that are there, regardless whether they're married or not. You know what I'm saying? I think the key thing is that the father's there. Less so that the father's married. Father's married is definitely a better situation.
Right.
But it's important that the father's there, particularly for boys. And I think that more importantly, or maybe this is not more importantly, but this is a thought that I have, is that a child growing up with a male and a female, right? A child growing up and just kind of seeing those different just sides of existing. I think there's a large benefit in that.
It is.
And while, look, if your child has been abandoned, and you're in the foster care system, and there's a same-sex couple that wants to adopt you and that sort of thing, that's probably better than the foster care system.
Right.
But I do believe that it is better. All other things equal. All other things are never equal. But just speaking hypothetically, I do think it's important for a child to really understand these things. And for me, like I said, my grandmother basically raised me until I was 13. Then I lived with my dad. And my dad had been married a few times before, and there's a lot of complication around that. But he got married when I graduated from high school. And that was actually the first time I lived in a true two-parent household, even though my stepmother was not my biological mother.
Right.
But that was the first time that my dad would say a thing, and I had a woman who was counteracting what he was saying, and was well, I don't know if that's necessarily a thing, right? Before that, what he said went, because it was just me and him. And so there's a lot to be said for the interplay between men and women, because again, we experience the world very differently. Men and women experience the world very differently.
Right.
And I think that children growing up in an environment where that difference in experience is expressed daily, I think it's superior to a situation where it's not. Whether it's because there's only one parent, or whether it's because both parents are the same gender.
Right. I agree. I just feel a lot of times, and the reason why I ask, because I belong to a Black life coaching group, and I have posted the show in the group so they could watch it. And so one of the life coaches, which is a female, she reached out to me and we had a conversation, and she was very proud of the conversation that we all had, and she was that people need to really understand, she's a woman, but she fights for the rights for the Black man, because the male energy is needed in the household. Yeah. And
it's all important.
It's very important. But then for me, like you said, when you finally saw your dad with your stepmom, you see that yin and yang, that taught you something too. And so for me, growing up in a two-family household, I see how they think and react differently. But also it teaches me how to compromise and deal with each other.
Absolutely.
Because at the end
it's
of
a
the
big
day,
part of it.
I can't always have the notion I have to be right all the time.
Right.
Or I have to win the argument all the time. Right. It's about us just getting to an understanding. Sometimes I gotta let her win.
Yes. That's right. And I think that's a big thing. It's And again, I mean, this could potentially just be just a function of just having two people that are kind of like in charge. But yeah, I do think that like being in a situation where like you see that negotiation, right? Again, like having grown up in like single parent households, like where there is no negotiation. It's what they say it is, you know.
Right.
And but then having had the experience of living in one where that's not necessarily the case, where there is some like give and take.
Right.
I think that give and take is very important. Like I had other things that were in my life that I think helped, you know, give me the right perspective, even though for most of my childhood I wasn't in a two-parent home. But I had a lot of like really, you know, loving female role models in my life.
Right.
And so I wasn't in a situation where like I just didn't, you know, I didn't understand like the female perspective and that sort of thing. But again, it's one thing to have like female role models. It's another thing for like she to be like a co-decision maker with like the man in the house and that sort of thing. And again, and I mean, look, and to be, you know, 100% clear, it is not my position that like a single woman or a single man can't raise a productive citizen.
Right.
But I think that like even single men and single women who've had to do that most of them would agree that if they had a partner in the situation that just kind of helped as a counterbalance, that
at the end of the day, whether it's a single man raising a child or a single woman raising a child, that child's still going to miss that particular energy that they need. Because actually we need both.
That's right.
To survive.
That's right.
Know how to deal with.
Yeah.
And so if we just deal with our moms and we just live in a female dominant household, then we're gonna have all we're gonna really get a lot of times is the female energy, and we don't have, and we need that male energy a lot of times. And then
absolutely. And
then what a lot of guys I coach is like they miss that. And even at 35, 36, you know, I could get on them about something and they would love it because they never had that from a man. Yeah. And so that's why I just think it's like really important. So she just told me to let y'all know, she said kudos because she was, she said a lot of times, whether it's on YouTube or on mainstream TV, you don't never see, black men having productive conversations like we did last week. And she wanted to give a shout out to all of y'all for that conversation we had last week.
We appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in, and hopefully we will continue to carry the mantle forward in a productive way.
Justice.
How you doing,
How you doing?
I'm good, sir.
Wait, hold on. Let's redo that. All right, yeah.
There you go.
Sometimes we go with handshakes. Sometimes we go with daps. Good to be here. I know nobody wants to hear my lame brain excuse, but anyone that lives on the east side of town knows that there's a big bottleneck issue between Panola and Memorial Drive. And unfortunately today, there actually was a semi-accident, but nonetheless, happy to be here.
Cheers.
I'm assuming that we were discussing Roe versus Wade.
No.
Okay.
I mean, that's probably a thing we should discuss.
That's why I mean, I'm sorry. Context clues. I thought I heard somebody say abortion, or thought I heard that Wade drive.
We were just kind of talking about just single parent, two parent, male, female household, influence on children. That sort of thing.
Some people I knew watched the show
from last week,
and they really wanted me to give y'all a kudos, and so we start with that. And so here we go with waiting on you.
Well, gentlemen, there are a lot of interesting things going on in the world, of course, today.
Indeed.
From the world of sports to politics, and obviously the biggest thing I think is the Roe v. versus Wade topic of discussion. And
let's get on that.
How do you gentlemen feel about that potentially being overturned or modified? Where do you guys stand in terms of I guess it's not, I'm not even here to drag religion into it, but obviously sure. I know people whose religious backgrounds like obviously make them lean a certain way, which is totally fine. And then I know some quote unquote free thinkers who say otherwise. So how do you guys feel about it?
Oh man, I get to go first here. So I don't know, man. I feel like so there are a couple of things to unpack here. Not a couple. There's several things to unpack here. So number one, Roe versus Wade, and more importantly, or a little more importantly, like Planned Parenthood versus Casey, are kind of the two kind of legal precedents that kind of undergird the general abortion regime in the United States of America. But these cases are, whether these cases are upheld or overturned and that sort of stuff, is the fundamental impact is just like at what level regulation around abortion lives. And so like Roe v. Wade and like Planned Parenthood versus Casey are all about like the federal level of like regulating abortion, right? And so Roe v. Wade put in this whole idea around like trimesters, and I think the part of the idea was that like after the third trimester you can have an abortion. And I think there's always been a criticism of Roe versus Wade, and then this is a criticism that I think was like even levied by like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who is no like anti-abortion activist, which is that you have to understand like how this country works and like how the legal system works. And the way the legal system works is that we have this document called the Constitution of the United States of America. And the way that Constitution is constructed is that the Constitution lays out all of the areas in which the federal government can regulate the lives of people in this country. And the fundamental idea behind the Constitution is that there's only a few things that the federal government should be able to actually control. Right. And then everything else goes to the states and the people. Right? That's the fundamental idea, right? And so with Roe v. Wade, the idea is like, what role can the federal government play around abortion? Before Roe v. Wade, different states had different ways of regulating abortion. For the most part, abortion was not legal, right? For the most part. There were exceptions and that sort of stuff, but in most states, before Roe v. Wade, abortion was not like an on-demand thing as it is now. Roe v. Wade happens, and that switches to a situation where like the feds are able to like, talk about like a baseline that all states have to agree to, or have to like, they don't have to agree, they just have to do it because the feds are in control there, right? And that the Roe v. Wade decision was and I think this is fair to say, I think if you look at the history of the decision, I think it's fair to say that like there was definitely like an activist cause that was, that had like, I don't know, I'm going to use terminology that I don't want to use, but we're just going to go with it and we can unpack it later. But sure. I think it's fair to say that like there's a movement within the judiciary to make abortion legal in the United States of America. And there were a number of Supreme Court cases and Supreme Court rulings that like started to open the door for Roe versus Wade. And it was like the Griswold case, I think it was the one that like really opened the door for Roe v. Wade. And so, this like set of decisions came down. The court was fairly liberal. There's always been this whole thing that like conservative justices, when they're appointed, become liberal over time. And so like a relatively liberal court, I think it was the Warren Court, they came down to the Roe versus Wade decision that basically says that like every state has to allow abortion within like these constraints.
Parameters.
Right. Now the Planned Parenthood versus Casey case, which came many years after Roe versus Wade, it kind of put a little bit more of a twist on Roe v. Wade in that, like, instead of like working on this whole trimester thing, trimester being like 3 months, that sort of thing, it was really around like the viability of the fetus, right? But the problem is that like,
is it considered a life or not? Correct.
Well, the idea of viability is like whether the fetus can like exist outside of the woman or not. Right. So if it's a viable fetus, it can live outside of a woman. The problem is that that's kind of a subjective thing. And by that, what I mean is that like, that's not like a concrete thing. There's no like, viability like 50 years ago is different from viability now. Right. Because of all these technological improvements, like children that would have died outside of the womb 50 years ago can live healthy lives now because of technological advancements. And it's probably not unreasonable to say that like moving forward there are going to be more technological advancements that are going to continue to move that backwards, right? And so, and I'm sorry, I've been talking way too much, and I'm sorry.
I'm learning right now.
And so, like, Casey is really the thing that is really managing abortion right now, right? Like, that's really the law of the land. Like, the trimester thing is not a thing anymore. Like, it's viability. That is what actually, like, governs abortion policy now. Which is why Alito's like, opinion, which got leaked, goes out to Roe and Casey. It goes out to both of these precedents. And Alito's fundamental decision is that, like, or his fundamental argument is that, number one, the feds, this should have never been a thing that came to the federal level. Because there were arguments, and I'm not going to take up any more time. You can do research, or we can do another show about it. But, like, sure. The arguments haven't held up a whole lot of weight when it comes to, like, because Roe is based on this idea of, like, a right to privacy that's based in the Constitution, and the enumerations and prenubras, and there's a whole weird thing that came out of Griswold that, like, opened the door for Roe, that allows, like, Roe to, like, find a right to privacy in the Constitution and attach, like, the right to abortion to the right to privacy.
Right.
That has been a thing that has always been very contentious over time. Like, that reading of the Constitution, I did the Constitution, like, creates a right to, like, a medical procedure, has always been a thing that has been debated. It's not been a thing that, like, when the Supreme Court came down with that ruling, there were plenty of people that disagreed, and, like, you know, and what happened on the right is that the right saw that, like, the left had, like, come up with this, like, activist movement that was designed to, like, create this series of, like, case precedent that, like, opened the door for Roe v. Wade. They decided that they would actually start their own activist situation that would be very much aligned toward overturning Roe v. Wade. And so that's where, like, if you've heard of the Federalist Society, like, that's where all that comes from, is, like, you know, creating these, like, judges that have an interpretation of the Constitution that is not quite as, like, let's just say, creative as the one from Roe v. Wade. It's very much one that's like, hey, it's very clear the Constitution doesn't say that, like, you have the right to an abortion, right? And so I think what's happened is that a lot of these guys on the court came from the Federalist Society. Like, I'm sure Kavanaugh and that sort of stuff. And, like, you know, so what's happened is that, like, that effort has actually, like, fully manifested itself.
Right.
And I think that there's always been a reasonable argument as to, like, whether this, like, right to privacy exists and whether that right to privacy is necessarily, like, mandates that, like, all states should allow, like, abortion up to a certain point. But the important thing to understand here is that, like, Roe v. Wade is not really a function of, like, whether abortion should be legal or not. Roe v. Wade is about whether the feds should be able to, like, create this, like, baseline across the entire country around abortion. So you can be very pro-abortion and still think that Roe v. Wade is just a terrible decision. And if you know a lot of lawyers, I know a few, and I know a few legal or liberal lawyers who have been telling me for years they felt like Roe v. Wade was not well established. And, like, even Ginsburg, like I said, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the, like, very liberal female justice who died a few years ago, has also expressed just issues with, like, how Roe v. Wade was decided. Because the thing is that, you know, you think about how the country should work. So the function of the courts should, so, you know, you got all these people that want to, like, protest around, like, the idea that Roe v. Wade might be overturned. But if the court is working the way that it should, that stuff shouldn't really matter. Because the court shouldn't really care about public opinion. It should care whether, like, the law,
the fundamentals,
the way that the Constitution is written, which is the law of the land, whether it supports that or not. Like, that's really the only question for the Supreme Court. And the court, again, you look at Plessy versus Ferguson, like, which a lot of people think was a bad, you know, Supreme Court idea. And that, like, it took, you know, Brown versus Board of Education, or sorry, no, it was Dred Scott that was a bad Supreme Court decision. It took Plessy versus Ferguson to overturn it, right? So the Supreme Court, like, makes bad decisions and they get overturned.
They do.
And so this idea that, like, Roe v. Wade, but there's also this idea in the Supreme Court around what they call stare decisis. Stare decisis is this idea that, like, there's a concept of, like, settled law, that, like, once the thing's been decided, the Supreme Court is not going to just, like, wantonly, like, overturn it, right? Because, like, stability is a thing that we value in our society. Like, people should be able to, like, rely on the law being the law and the law just not, like, randomly changing, right? But obviously, like, Dred Scott was shitty law. So if you're saying that, like, because of stare decisis, like, Dred Scott should have continued to be the law, I mean, I think a lot of black people would have disagreed with that, right?
Right.
And so the idea that like a law, a ruling should be sacred, regardless of like how that ruling actually matches up with the Constitution, has always been a dubious assertion, right? And so what we're seeing right now is, you know, the Kavanaughs and the Gorsuches and the Thomases and the Amy Coney Barretts and like, you know, the more conservative court members who, again, you have to understand that like when you're talking about like from a jurisprudence standpoint, conservatism means a different thing than it means from just like a legislative standpoint. What conservatism a lot of times means is that like when you interpret the Constitution and the law, you have to interpret it in the way that it was interpreted at the time that the law was written. All right.
Okay.
And so the more liberal justices will say, "Oh, well, the Constitution is a living document, and we should interpret it."
Well, not to interrupt you.
No, please. I've been talking for way too long.
No. I want you to continue. Honestly, I think I'm being brought up to snuff on things and learning things, and ultimately, that's what we strive to do: is inform the people. And I'm sure as many of you that did not know a lot of those nuances, but nonetheless, we had a conversation. I guess it was last week or 2 weeks ago, where we talked about, or maybe 3 weeks ago, maybe. It was one of the more recent episodes, but nonetheless, we started talking about the Bible and religious document and text and translations, and then how things were interpreted. So I'm sorry, just to piggyback off one of your points from a long time ago. It was the telephone point that you had made, that we were playing a giant game.
Yes.
A telephone.
Our perception of reality is the function of a giant game of telephone that we play as a society. Yes.
Well, I was circling it back for the listeners. I hope. The interpretation of the.
So I mean, obviously interpret, and that's what the judiciary does. Like, so the executive branch, so the legislative branch writes the law. The executive branch enforces the law. The judicial branch interprets the law. That's how our government works, right? And so the judicial branch is there to be like, well. So number one, the judicial, and the thing is that the judicial branch, it varies based on what level you're talking about. So like at like the trial court level, they're just kind of like, well, the law says this and you did this, like, did you break the law or not? Right? When you get to the Supreme Court, it's like, is this law actually constitutional or not? Like, is this law actually in line with like how the law of our land, which is the Constitution, which is the final word on law in this land, is it in line with that?
The golden rules, so to speak.
and so that's like the big conflict. And again, like, you know, the question of like whether you should look at the law based on the context in which it was written versus whether you should look at the context of now. That is the big like liberal conservative like debate. The conundrum. You're right. From a jurisprudence standpoint, it's like, how should you look at the law? And I think there are arguments that can be made on both sides. I do think, but personally, and I'll just speak personally, and then I'll hand it over to you guys. I think personally, it makes sense to me that the more originalist view makes the most sense to me. And I say that because the courts should not be making the law. And when the courts are able to look at a law that was written 50 years ago and then impute all of the cultural things that we have going on now into that law, what I think it does is it takes away from the Congress, the legislative branch, which is the one that most represents the people.
Correct.
It takes away from their ability to create laws that are a function of the will of the people.
Right.
And so if it turns out, we saw this with the Voting Rights Act, that the Supreme Court was the way this thing was written in 1965 doesn't actually make sense for right now. We're not saying that there should be no regulation on how states create their voting regimes. But we're saying that having this 1960s view of it is not the way to go, and Congress should come up with some new rules.
Right.
Now, it turned out that at the time that Congress was couldn't agree on anything.
Right.
But that's not the problem of the court, right? The court can't be well, Congress can't create anything, so maybe we should create something. That's not how it should work.
Right.
Like, if Congress can't create anything, then all of that discord should like be clear to the people, and then the people make a decision around who they put in office,
right.
and they'll put people in office to figure this thing out, right? Who have those incentives.
Right.
But the courts should not do that thing. And so my fundamental personal view on it is that I don't believe that Roe v. Wade is a well-decided case. I just don't. I have too many lawyer friends who've convinced me of that.
Yes.
Too many, and a lot of them being very liberal, progressive lawyers that have just convinced me of that case. But more importantly, I think that when it comes to the idea of abortion, this is the last thing I'm going to say. When it comes to the idea of abortion, this is how I look at it, and I think it's very simple. So, we live in a society where like we don't look fondly on killing people. Right.
No.
So if a mother killed their like 10-year-old kid, we'd be like, that chick needs to be locked the fuck up, right?
Well, and in other cases, stoner. Death row.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So we'd also probably say that like if like her child was like 1 day old and she killed that child, that like we'd be like, no, put her ass behind bars.
What a bitch.
Right. So then the question is like, what's the difference between like a 1 day old child and a negative 1 day old child? Right.
Yeah.
And then the question becomes, what's the difference between a negative 1 day old child? Like, I think most people would be like, if you killed a negative 1 day old child,
You'd be like,
like that'd be some bullshit. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and just to think about it like this. Think about how many times we've like obviously read newspaper articles, seen stuff on social media, TV, and let's say a deranged, and it can work both ways, but normally is a deranged boyfriend or maybe husband that like got their spouse or partner pregnant, and then they killed their spouse, and then guess what? They get charged with double
murder. Yes, that's right. That's right. And that's the thing that like, and again, that varies by jurisdiction and that sort of thing, but that's definitely a thing. And so but that's the thing is that like, the fundamental question is that if we accept that we are in a society where like killing other human beings is a thing that we look negatively upon, then the fundamental question is, at what point does a conceived embryo gain the right to not be killed?
Yes.
That's the fundamental question.
Right.
And I don't know that, and so, you know, so part one answer is like whether it's viable or not, right? And that's the precedent that we are under. That makes sense to me. But that's not the only thing that makes sense to me, right? Like, I don't think that's just like obviously the right answer. Like, or the trimester thing. Like, I guess that makes a little less sense, but it makes sense. But like, it's not obvious that that's the right thing. There's some concerns in like conception, and again, like that's not obviously the right thing. It was not obviously the wrong thing. And so there's a whole lot of disagreement on this. And to the extent that like I've heard all this stuff about, well, they overturn Roe v. Wade, they're gonna like overturn gay marriage and all that stuff. But no, look, I don't think that's true.
Right.
Because I think that there's way less disagreement on stuff like interracial marriage and segregation and gay marriage than there is over abortion. Abortion is a thing where there's clear disagreement on where you draw that line.
There's a human life involved, and then obviously with us living in a country that was founded on, I could be wrong, Christianity. Obviously, there's the religious morale that, you know, thumps in the back of a lot of these Christian heads, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
So, nobody wants a dirty mark against their reputation or with God, that is, and then obviously amongst the people. So,
because if you go from what you're saying from a spiritual or religious background, you know, it's going to force a lot of people to then live more of a righteous lifestyle, because a lot of times some people use abortion as a way of birth control.
Of course. Yes.
You know, because they don't want to use condoms, and the women are not using anything because they don't want like the feeling of it, which we get.
Real pleasure. So
right, real pleasure. But then the baby come up and now nobody wants to have it.
Yep.
You know. So that should have been a thought process when you was having sex, but so you putting pleasure over, like you saying, over the life of a unborn child. Yeah. You know, so it's like you said, it's a lot of different things, moving parts into that to make a decision. You know, and everybody might have their their personal feelings of what they feel is right. But at the end of the day, I think we all have to start, I think moving a little bit differently.
Definitely.
I'm sorry, I talked so much on this shit.
No, man. No,
go ahead, y'all. I took way too much time.
All I would say is this: one, I'm thankful that you educated us. Again, I definitely just learned plenty of things sitting here as far as a lot of the nuances and a lot of intricate details that even I'm sure some of the listeners didn't know. But more importantly, but before I came here, I actually posed this question to an older gentleman that I know. When I say older, I'll just say 50 plus. And I was like, hey, just real quick, where do you stand on this? And this individual, it's just kind of like, he's kind of with it being overturned. And I said, well, why? Like, and not, why? I'm just curious. Not that I'm anti it, I'm not pro it. I'm just curious, because this is good banter. And essentially it stemmed back to his religious beliefs, which are totally fine. Nonetheless, basically, we were speaking about it, kind of threw out some situations. And in short, let me just sum all what it is I have to say. I do believe personally that it is a woman's right to decide. Now, it can get murky, to be quite frank with you, as far as just abortion and totality, because I have seen and read cases of where a man has gotten his girlfriend or maybe wife, but more so just the partner is the best term we can use, pregnant, and the woman didn't even, and maybe not even for any particular reason, the woman wasn't ready to be a mother, but the dad was ready to be a father.
Sure.
And he's like, yo, what the fuck? And excuse my language.
Yeah.
But I've literally
that's a big part of it, yeah.
seen footage, because it kind of seems like it's always the man is the one that, generally aborted. And that's not the case.
That's not the case.
That is not the case. Literally, I saw, I don't know how many of you
not all the time, anyway.
Not all the time, right. I don't know how many of you use Reddit, but Reddit is a gem of an app, and there are some interesting things on Reddit and these forums, and nonetheless, I saw a video on Reddit recently, and it was a father pleading to his partner, please do not do this, like, please. But I guess what I'm getting at is to circle it back to how I personally feel about it. Everything in life, of course, is circumstantial, and I am just under the impression that, again, I am not a victim of rape. I will never be able to be in a position to speak for victims of rape, but hypothetically, I know these things exist. I know women that have been raped, and my sympathy is to them. But if a woman is raped, hypothetically, by a man that she did not want to have sex with, and this man, ejaculates in her, and a child is conceived, she has every right not to want to bear that man's child. I'm sorry. That's just how I personally feel, right? That's how I personally feel. So I think, again, basically, essentially, to bring it full circle, excuse me.
Bless you.
We have to, like you said, Rashid, it's kind of like, all right, well, what is a human life, right? That has to be defined. And then second, I mean, even the men that just are against abortion 100%, you have to look at the women in your family, and nobody wants to do that because it's uncomfortable, perhaps, to think about that. But just potentially think about if your mother, sister, niece, female cousin, somebody potentially raped them, and what would you want them to keep the baby? I don't know. I mean, it's tough.
Well, I think it's worth noting that, like, even in places where, like, abortion is, like, illegal, some will have, like, exceptions for that situation. But again, like, some don't. And I mean, and again, the question is, and it's funny, as you all know, I trend libertarian, and like, this is a big thing. This is a big rift in the libertarian community, because it's like the rights of the mother versus the rights of the child. And at what point does it become a child? Like, at what point does it gain the right to not be killed?
Right.
And at what point does like killing it actually like cross that threshold that we have for like killing a 10-year-old or killing a 1-day-old, right?
Right.
And that's the thing. There's not an obvious answer to that. There are a bunch of answers. They all make sense, but there's no just obvious answer. And that's the problem, is that everyone wants to act like there's an obvious answer, but there's just not, because it's a fundamentally philosophical question.
Right.
And so, you know, my position is just that, like, if we can't come to an agreement on this sort of thing, then from a governance standpoint, the regulation makes the most sense to be closest to specific communities.
Yes.
Right.
I agree.
And so, which means that the federal level is the worst place for it to be.
Right.
All right. And so that's the thing. That's where I stand on it.
Yes, and to just use a parallel, because I failed to do that. And again, I'm not in a position to speak on what people should do with their body. I'm not. So let's just preface this statement. Now, if you're out here, two healthy individuals having premarital sex, and again, it goes back to what you brought up. And basically, you guys are doing it, and then you decide to have a child. Well, excuse me, not decide. A child comes from the natural lust of two people, two heterosexual people, obviously. If that is what comes from it, I mean, and then you say, well, nah, just abort it. Somebody could make the argument that's a bit, irresponsible. But again, I'm not saying it's irresponsible, but I'm saying that obviously it's like, just be a little more careful, you know?
Well, and I think that's the fundamental thing, is that, like, you know, and I think that's what drives a lot of conservative critiques, is that, like, no woman gets, like, pregnant, like, even though a lot of conservatives are religious people, particularly Christians, where, you know, there's an immaculate conception. but outside of that, for the most part, like, a pregnancy is not a thing that just happens to you right now. And again,
unless you're a seahorse.
Rape is an important thing. It's an important kind of component here. But again, like that, rape and like incest are like 2% or less of like
if
abortions,
that, right?
Yeah, I mean, they're an extremely so we shouldn't be arguing from like these kind of extremes, right?
But those are the extremes. I'm just speaking from a man that does not have any children.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, those are the first arguments. I'm sure many of you that are listening, those are the first arguments. Literally, they're like, well, what if I got raped?
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, that for me, that's like avoiding the actual like.
The meat,
right? That's avoiding the real issue.
That's
right.
The skin.
That can all be accommodated for, and it is accommodated for in a lot of situations. Not all, but it's accommodated for in a lot of like abortion bans around the world. But like that's not anywhere close to like the majority of abortions that happen.
Right.
And then, I'm sorry, gentlemen. I do have one question for our host. Again, I'm obviously the woman. The woman is the.
When women call in,
right,
if you want to. Let's again. We realize there are 3 dudes here that will never be in this situation. So
correct.
Call in, holler at us. Keep us in check.
Educate me. Comment. Do what you have to do. But I genuinely want to know. Kind of where you guys kind of stand on it, and then I don't know. It's tricky.
It's tricky. It is a tricky situation for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry. All right. So basically, I guess even from a government standpoint, will there ever be a scenario where a man has say so? Let's say it is just obviously because there are men that are like, no, don't abort it.
Sure.
Will the man ever have say so? It's just a question.
It's an interesting question. Dave Chappelle had this whole thing. It's funny, and maybe we need to talk about the fact that Dave Chappelle got assaulted on stage recently.
Let's.
But Chappelle had this whole thing. One of his more recent things was like, look, if you got the right to kill the motherfucker, I at least have the right to abandon it. You know what I'm saying? That was his thing. And it speaks to this idea that like there's a total asymmetry of power here, which is that a woman gets pregnant And if, under current orthodoxy, like, it's her choice, right? It's her choice whether, like, she wants to, like, get this dude on the hook for 18 years or not, right? And again, from her standpoint, she's probably just thinking, like, whether she wants to be on the hook for 18 years or not. But, like, that choice does not only impact her.
It doesn't, because
it gives her a lot of legal power over the man.
Legal, and then there are responsible men out here. I mean,
of course,
despite the narrative of... I think obviously us being black men, we speak from a black man's perspective, obviously. But oftentimes, black men are painted as deadbeats and ain't shit, and obviously that is not true. And there are plenty of black fathers I know, and then some that are not even fathers yet, who are ready to assume that role of father, who literally are like, man. Let's get it done.
Sure. And the things that there are women too that will like rise up to this. There's a whole narrative like, oh well, you're poor, you have no money, or whatever, you shouldn't be having kids, and so forth and so on. And I mean, there's something to that, but there are plenty of women who like.
Sheen, I'm sorry, I have to cut you off.
Go ahead.
I say this all the time to some of my peers. And obviously, I know that us being in Atlanta, it's not about Atlanta, but us being in Atlanta, when just kind of this semi-materialistic cultural thing we got going on in our community, when you actually think about it, broke people get fucked more than rich people. I mean, the world's population would not be where it's at without broke people fucking. Like, real talk, bro. Really think about this, bro. Like,
I mean, sure.
It costs nothing.
You are. I mean, look.
No, but you know what I'm saying.
I know exactly what you're saying.
Financially being able to take care. Look, we've been fine without the financial support, right?
Sure. and I think to even dig down into that, like when you look at like countries and the level of development in countries and the level of education, that sort of thing, and like what happens is that once the quality of life, the quality of education goes up in a country, the birth rates go down. And even within a country, like even within the United States of America, like that exact thing, like, very educated women who, have a lot of career prospects and that sort of stuff, wait later to have kids if they have kids at all.
Right.
Whereas women who are not so much educated tend to have more kids. And I don't know if you ever saw Idiocracy. Did you ever see that?
I did.
Yeah, there's this whole thing, like the whole beginning of Idiocracy is about it. So at the beginning of the movie, there's this whole thing where they're like interviewing this like clearly like middle class educated couple. They're like, well, I don't know if I should have a kid. Maybe we should put it off so that I could get my, degree and get my career on track. Or then there's like this couple like rednecks that are like, woo, just like fucking and like kids popping out or whatever. Right. And so I mean that is definitely a recognized dynamic that is real. I mean, Idiocracy is obviously like kind of a parody of it, but that's a real thing.
Yep.
And there are implications to it.
I agree. I just think, I don't know, man, because like you said, a lot of people I know that are not, like you said, educated. They don't have a lot going on. They're popping out babies left and right. And the whole mindset is, it goes to a podcast I was watching, and I would want your input on it.
Sure.
So it goes back to the dynamics of the black man, the black woman.
You talking Kevin Samuels?
Well, I watch him too, but
okay,
other
sorry.
guy.
I had to ask. Sorry,
this other guy named Mr. Let It Go.
Okay.
And he was saying that the black woman is married to the government. The government is their man. Because
you mean Laris? I'm messing.
That's something he would say too.
Yeah, I'm messing around.
It is definitely a thing that is out there.
It's good, man.
It is an idea that is out there.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I saw the video. I saw the video, and how he broke it down, like every situation. Whether it's Section 8, SNAP, all the things they could get. Mm-hmm. If they don't have the man in the house, well, they get SNAP regardless, but Section 8, they can't have the man in the house and this and that. So it's like, they were saying that the women would choose the government and the freebies they could get to live a certain type of way than to be with a man.
Gosh, are they wrong though? I mean, if the man is not shit, excuse my language.
Sure.
But I don't disagree with his take, that individual's take, but man, at the end of the day, guys, I mean, we know some ain't shit. I mean, well, I think some of us know, not saying we all know ain't, quote unquote, ain't shit people, but when I say ain't shit, I mean in the context of like, gosh, like basically the man is more of a burden to the woman if that financially, mentally, I don't.
And
does that make sense?
I know what you're saying.
Those scenarios do
I
exist.
know what you're saying.
They do exist.
But I'm gonna put my coaching hat on. You know, a lot of these women also know that these men ain't shit.
Well, yes, you're absolutely right about
and
that.
they still make the conscious choice to have a baby
To
by
procreate,
these guys,
yeah.
to procreate. Because I'm dealing with a couple clients right now who made the choice to have unprotected sex with someone, you know, who they knew they did not want to have a child with. This is the male. And he's telling the person we should have the baby, but at the end of the day, she felt if I hold on to this baby, I could get him.
Yes.
So it's like
That exists.
That exists because a lot of people do feel
security.
That it's security, and if I have the baby, then I can get the man because I'm gonna have the man around me, and a lot of times not the case.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've heard that. I do kind of agree with that, only just from a personal experience. Per se, in my small sample size of life, I'll be gone here soon. And knock on wood, not tonight. But you guys get what I'm saying. Life is short, but and can be long too. But basically, what I'm saying is, it's like, yes, I've seen and heard of scenarios where women my senior have thought, and even some my age have thought, well, I thought that this would make us a family. And it's basically the relationship didn't have any of the characteristics prior to the baby being involved of a family. I mean, obviously, yes, we ate, we went out to dinner, we went many a dates, maybe we took a few trips, but ultimately family is like when shit hits the fan, are you going to be there?
Right.
And everyone's always, I think y'all know the group, I forget the name of the group, but it's like they're like Sunny Days, everybody loves them.
New Edition.
New Edition.
Oh my God.
Can you stand the rain? And I think that's kind of what like family is.
Exactly.
Sure. But see, for me, this is all culture. This is all culture and values.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, in the current discourse, talking about this sort of stuff is just kind of like not very popular. Because I think that, you know, a certain group of people will be like, well, if you talk about like the culture of black people, you're like blaming the victim, and you're like, and I think, you know, and I get that, though. I do think that, like, at some point, again, women don't just magically get pregnant. Right. There are decisions that are made.
Right.
And
it's really more of their decision. Not most of the time. I'm sorry.
And again, I mean, I'm not saying that they should be the only ones accountable for the decision and all that sort of stuff. But again, if you make someone more than a woman accountable, again, you get into the stuff you talked about earlier, right? Which is like, you know, where does a man figure into this equation? Right now, the man is just like held hostage.
Right.
And like, you know, whatever to her decision.
It takes two to make one.
It does take two to make one. And so, like, there's a fundamental question of like culture and values, and I think that it's just out of vogue these days to really just talk about that sort of thing, because I do think that, like, and you know, whether this is part of like the women's liberation movement, that sort of thing, and like women should be free to like have sex with whoever they want, and like, and there's a whole conversation about, you know, whether, like, you know, women should be like men. Right, like, because I think part of this whole thing is like, well, men are able to have sex with everyone, women should be able to do that too. But the fact that the undebatable fact of the matter is that the cost of the worst outcome of having sex is way higher for women than it is for men. That's just the bottom line.
Yes.
And so yes, men and women should think differently about this. So the idea like a woman should like think like a man on this sort of thing is ridiculous. And well, in my opinion, it's ridiculous. Oh, here we go. Maybe this is someone that's going to tell me that it's not ridiculous.
I'll do this.
All right, we just want to answer.
When you watch my beer, I'm going to step out here and take this call.
All right. we know who that is. We know who that is. What's up, bro?
Yeah. So, look. Hi.
Hey, who are we speaking with? Well, this is a beer and a conversation.
I am a what do you call it? A third time caller, a long time listener. Listen, I just want to say this, and I think you guys are doing a great job, but here's the reality of things, is that the government
educate
continues. I'm sorry, what did you say?
I say educate us, black man.
Oh, no. Oh, I don't know. I mean, it's you guys who educate me, but, but I digress. I'm not a genius like you, Rashid. I'm more of a pseudo genius. But I would say this. The issue that I think is that the government, like, there's money in division. We got to understand that. It's money in division.
Yes.
If there will be no... I rode past the Philadelphia Municipal Family Court today. They got a whole business dedicated to division, especially in the black community. And I need you to look up per capita what babies are aborted the most. And so then you can understand what I'm saying.
Yes. So to your point,
if divorce attorneys, they make their money off of division. People stay together. No, they don't have a business. This is a business. You know what I mean? Like, and the problem with all of this is that, we call the government Uncle Sam. Black women, the government is daddy. You take care of them, you pay the rent.
I told you, Kev.
Hey, look, if you don't like what this black man did, we can lock his black ass up for you. If, he pay child support, who the fuck goes 18 fucking years and doesn't have a bad financial year? You name one.
Magic Johnson.
Kid? Okay, Magic Johnson. Okay, good one. There you go.
Sure.
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, there are always going to be exceptions,
You don't
yes.
have one bad year in 18 years. Hey, you know what? Let's go get that scoundrel and round him up, throw his black ass in jail. Let me tell you something. This whole system, you make a bad decision, nigga, your ass is grass. They make a bad decision, they got morning after pills, they got abortions, they got whatever it is to absolve them of any type of responsibility, and that is why they're not responsible people. Abortion is fine, depending on what you say or whatever. But if they had to stay with that motherfucking kid and take care of that kid with no fucking help, they wouldn't just be laying down getting laid by some nigga named Tyrone that got 6 kids by 4 women. But there's no consequences for anything they do. But you make a mistake, your ass is grass.
No,
I think it's... Sorry, go ahead.
No, Rashid, you're my...
Obviously, I think it's fair to say that, like, having, like, easy access to abortion does have, like, an impact on behavior.
I didn't press any button. I hope he calls back in. I just noticed that.
Maybe just, yeah.
Well, Laris, we know you're listening, so I know you just heard Rashid, but no, there are consequences to that shit. And believe it or not, there are. I've only encountered maybe one thus far. Well, actually 2. There are mothers. They do not regret having the baby, but they definitely regret the baby father. I think that women are naturally nurturers, and honestly, I think women. I think we all are here to procreate in a weird way. Obviously, that's why there's like fucking 8 billion people on Earth. And globalization, literally every fucking way.
We are all a product of people who have successfly a long line of people who have successfully recreated. Every one of us is a descendant of that.
Fucked and had great sex, and at least the man came. Well, I guess we can't.
Some
speak
have.
for
I
the
mean, yeah,
women,
I
right?
mean, who knows? Who knows the circumstances
Then
of
you got
the
pre
reproduction?
coming. I'm sorry to get so nastily and vulgar, but we're all adults here. Nonetheless, basically to your point, Laris, is that there are women who have children and they are not upset with their baby, but I've had 2 girls tell me, like, basically being a single mother is fucking terrible.
I'm sure. I'm sure it's certainly not as great as like having a partner to help. You know.
Like basically just like, yo, fuck this guy. Like he's terrible. Like literally, he broke my heart. And you gotta. Golly, man, it can kind of be 50-50, man. It's a lot of dream selling going on out here. So. Nonetheless, well, gentlemen,
we're getting to that time.
We had man, I appreciate you guys. I was late, so I thank y'all, man, and we look forward to doing it again next week. Obviously, Sheed and Kev, if y'all got something to say, man, say it. I've got nothing.
Well, first I'll go. First, continue prayers for your dad.
Appreciate you. I very much appreciate you,
want
Kevin.
Abundant recovery for him. For me. First of all, thank you guys for letting me come in. Thanks for Laris asking me to come and join y'all while he's gone. For those who don't know, I do have a book out called Waking Up Winning No Matter What, Volume 2. So those who are listening to this show today, if you inbox me and ask how to purchase the book and you buy the book, you will get a signed copy, but also you will get a $500 Grand Air rebate card. What that is that you go get you an airline ticket round trip, as long as it costs $500. You will give them. You will send it when you take the trip. You send back the boarding passes going and coming back, and your itemized bill of statement, and send it back with the form, and they will refund you. So it's like me giving you a free airline ticket just for supporting me. So inbox me at Kevin Thornton and find out how you can do that, and I'll let you know.
Well, I'm definitely going to DM you. Well, right. I'm going to talk to you in real life.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, all I'm going to say is that, again, I feel like the abortion issue is complicated, and I feel like the media has every intention to make it simple and stupid, and most of the conversation around it has been just that. I do think that, like, there are questions around the federal government's role in, like, regulating abortion that are reasonable, and I think reasonable people can disagree on where the feds should land on this sort of thing. So it's not necessarily an indictment on you whether you think Roe v. Wade should stand or fall, but just understand that Roe v. Wade is not some fundamental position on abortion itself. It is a position on where and how abortion should be regulated. I would certainly ask everyone to just really take the time to really understand the issue, how these court cases are currently constructed. Read Alito's, read his opinion, the one that got leaked. I think that opinion goes a long way to just kind of understand where the fault lines in the argument are from a legal standpoint. But you know what? If you want to protest, I feel like you should protest for your state. Like, try to lobby your state. Because again, if the judges are doing what they're supposed to do, they don't really care about what you think. they care about the law. And so if Roe v. Wade gets overturned, the important place to really lobby is going to be get to know your state representative, get them on your side so that your state can put the types of regulations in place that you feel are appropriate around abortion.
Boom.
And don't believe anything I said. Do your own research.
Boom, boom, boom. All right, we're out.
All right. Peace.